Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Sounds Like Sam. I'm your host Sam. Thanks for tuning in today. I really appreciate it. If you haven't already, go make sure you subscribe to Sounds Like Sam wherever you listen to your podcast. Today's episode is a really good one. It's going to be another Bullseye Fantasy Football Podcast episode, and I'm going to be telling you 5 wide receivers that I'm targeting this season in all of my fantasy football drafts. For these 5 players in particular, I am not counting any of the guys in the top 10 because it's not really that hard to choose. The hard part becomes who am I going to choose later on in the draft. So I'm going to give you guys rounds 3 and up. These are guys that I like across the board, so you can easily find really good guys in those first 2 rounds. It's the rounds later on in the draft that is usually the tough part for people, so I hope that the research I've done and my opinions help you make a decision on where you will go in your fantasy football draft. So with that being said, let's get started. First wide receiver I'm going to be talking about today is going to be Devonta Smith, the Philadelphia Eagles wide receiver. He is a third-year wide receiver this year. He's the Alabama guy who won the Heisman back in 2021, I believe. I watched a video of him the other day. Probably the quickest feet in the game right now, if you watch him do those ladders. Besides his quick feet, he has a really impressive resume that honestly deserves him to be, I think, a likely top 7 candidate as a wide receiver this season. What's crazy is him and A.J. Brown are on the same team, and they are so elite together. It's what makes the Eagles' offense so dynamic because they have A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith as wide receivers, Dallas Goedert as a tight end, have Jalen Hurts. Well, now they have DeAndre Swift in the backfield and Rashad Penny. It's a really interesting group of guys, and it's really difficult to play against them. So let's get into a little bit of the stats involving Devonta Smith and why I like him. One, his ADP is 3.11, which is equivalent to pick 11 in the 3rd round. Basically a 4th round pick for some people. He'll fall into the 3rd or 4th round, and I think that is an excellent pick considering what he's done last year and what I think he can do this year. The Smith and Brown duo, they were dominant last season. They are 2 of the best wide receivers right now in the game. And what's crazy is Devonta Smith actually had more receptions than A.J. Brown did on less targets than A.J. Brown had, given it was only like 10 targets more that A.J. Brown had. Considering that Smith had 95 receptions and A.J. Brown had 88 is very surprising. So I think he can easily pass 100 receptions this season. What's also crazy is he scored 7 touchdowns last season, which was 28% of all the Eagles' passing touchdowns that were scored. So more than 1/4 of all the touchdowns scored by passing the ball last season, they went to Devonta Smith, which is really good moving forward because, why wouldn't you want a guy who gets 1/4 of the touchdowns? You love touchdowns in fantasy football, so that's really good to see. With Brown, he combined for 52.4% of the Eagles' total receptions, accounted for 72% of the team's passing touchdowns. Is that right? Oh, yeah, both of them did, yeah. So that makes sense. Considering what A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith did, the fact that Devonta Smith is almost 2 rounds, you can get him 2 rounds later than A.J. Brown, and he finished with better receptions. I just think it's a good deal, and I think he has a really good potential this year to do better than he did last season, and I think if you're looking for a 4th round or 3rd round wide receiver, he's going to be a good guy to look to. My next wide receiver I'm going to talk about is DeAndre Hopkins. He is now, I talked about him a little bit on the last episode of my podcast. I told you that I do like him. I want to draft him. But I didn't really give you any stats behind that. And honestly, I was looking at them, and it's amazing what he did on the Cardinals. And not all of it was even with Kyler Murray. Some of it was with Colt McCoy. DeAndre Hopkins has, I think he's an elite wide receiver, and I don't know why people are passing on him. I mean, you can literally get him. His ADP right now is 5.07, which is the 7th pick in the 5th round. A gold mine for you if you're looking for a wide receiver. Even last year, with only playing in 9 games, he accounted for 44% of the team's total passing touchdowns. He finished with 7.1 receptions per game and 79.8 yards a game, which was 10th best in the NFL. And the 7.1 receptions per game was 4th best as a wide receiver. With Ryan Tannehill, people don't really like him. But, I mean, A.J. Brown did great with Ryan Tannehill, and I don't think people were complaining when he was on the team. I think DeAndre is a better receiver as well, so I think he's going to be able to adjust and make the most of the situation. I mean, there's no way Ryan Tannehill is going to be worse than Brock Osweiler, and I think DeAndre even said that Brock was like the worst quarterback he's ever had in his career. So as long as it's not Brock Osweiler, I think he's good. 5th round is a steal. I think he has the potential to be a top 10 wide receiver again. Would not be surprised if he finished over 100. I said last episode I thought he would get at least 90. I would not be surprised if he gets over 100 receptions, like 1,400 yards, 10 touchdowns. I think he's going to have a good season this year, and I think you would be stupid to pass on him. But that is just my opinion. Next guy is going to be a Green Bay Packers wide receiver, Christian Watson. We're now moving up to 7.1 ADP. That's his average draft position of the pick 1 in round 7. I think this is a decent pick if you are looking for a wide receiver right here. It's obviously a little bit risky because nobody really knows what Jordan Love will do, who is the new quarterback of the Green Bay Packers. He's taking over Aaron Rodgers' role. But from what I saw in the game that Jordan Love played versus the Eagles, I think it was, I want to say November 27th. I could be getting that wrong. But the way that Jordan Love played and his connection with Christian Watson, it was very apparent that, one, Christian Watson was the best wide receiver that the Green Bay Packers had on their roster and currently have. And 2, Jordan Love looked like he learned a lot and was ready for the big-time stage. And they didn't win, but I think he played really well. Every ball he threw looked phenomenal. I know I'm not supposed to be talking about Jordan Love, and this is all about Christian Watson, but I think the chemistry that Jordan Love and Watson build is going to be very critical in fantasy if you are looking to draft Watson. And they need a wide receiver 1. I think Watson will be that guy. He's a speedster. He only caught 41 receptions last year, but 7 of them were touchdowns. So I have good faith that he is going to have a solid season this year, and he should be I think he'll be, if not a good bench player, a decent flex play for you, especially in PPR leagues. So I really like him. He's only going with his 2nd year, and with the 1 game that he did play with Jordan Love, I will say, he had 4 receptions on 6 targets for 110 yards and 1 touchdown. And that was against a really good Philadelphia Eagles secondary. So he's got speed, he's got hands, and I think he's got big-time playability. So I really like him as a 7th round pick, and he's a guy I'm going to be targeting as well. Next guy is one of my favorites. It's Steelers wide receiver George Pickens. His current ADP right now is pick 3 in round 9. I think this is a steal considering everything that the Steelers have to offer this season, which is an upgraded offensive line, Kenny Pickett coming into his 2nd year, a upgraded talent on the roster. With what I saw last season and the big-time catches he's able to make both in training camp, during practices, and in the games. I mean, he had that one catch last year that was probably the best catch of the year last year. I think he is going to have a decent chance to be a good player for you this season, if not to even take over the wide receiver 1 position. I know it's a little bit out there because Deontay Johnson has been the wide receiver 1, and he was the main target as the Pittsburgh Steelers wide receiver 1. But I think with the targets that he had last season, which was 84, which isn't bad for a rookie, catching 52 of them, he caught 4 touchdowns, 36% of the Steelers' total passing touchdowns last year. He's definitely someone to consider late because I think he could have a breakout season. Yeah, I just think he has a lot of potential, and he'll be a solid pick for you. So he's another guy I'm targeting. Next guy is going to be John Mechie, Texans wide receiver. He missed the rookie season. He missed his rookie season last year due to cancer. He has come back. He's been cleared to play, at least in training camp. This is a little bit of a big time sleeper that I'm looking at as a wide receiver, because if you know me, I love SEC collegiate wide receivers who did really well, and John Mechie was one of those guys. He's an Alabama wide receiver. There's really no clear wide receiver one on the Texans, and to me, watching what he was able to do, at least in practice, I mean, it's not really much to go off of, but I don't know if I can stress enough that how much I like drafting former SEC players, especially from schools like Alabama or LSU, with like my last pick. This is the kind of guy I'm looking for because nobody's really thinking about the Texans this year. They have some really young talent on the team, and John Mechie is one of those guys. He has the chance and opportunity to step up and be the number one guy for them. So that's really why I'm interested in him, and also because you can get him at almost nothing. So if he doesn't end up working out, he could always be a good dump guy. So I know that isn't exactly what people are looking for in fantasy, but sometimes it's necessary to have one of those guys. So I think he's a solid candidate for like a last pick. Here's a bonus one I'll give you. Odell Beckham Jr. He's my bonus wide receiver. Just for listening to the whole episode, I really like Odell. I mean, he really was a touchdown guy for the Rams when he played back in 2021. He got injured in the Super Bowl and hasn't played. He didn't play at all last season. He got picked up by the Ravens this year. He's going to be working with Lamar Jackson, even though a good opportunity to be a touchdown end zone guy for the Ravens, and he still has the big playability. His injury concerns are still a huge risk, but he's definitely a guy who isn't really being drafted super high. You can get him really late. I believe on ESPN he's ranked like 120 overall, but that's also like basically end of the draft. So he's another guy to look out for and just basically have on your bench and see what happens, because he could be a guy that explodes this year too. And at least just be a touchdown guy. So those are 5 wide receivers plus a bonus guy that I'm looking at to draft this season. If you have any questions or comments about this episode, feel free to reach out to me at bullseyefantasy1@gmail.com, or follow me on social media at soundslikesam1 and message me your question or whatever. Make sure you rate and subscribe to the podcast, and yeah, peace.